Now, if I were still back at Purdue, I would be pretty confident about this first question. If I would ask if there would be any farmers that were listening or present, we would certainly have actually quite a few. The demographics here, I suspect, are a little bit different. So there may indeed not be any farmers listening today and watching. This next one, though, is how many have ever seen a mustard plant? I have not. I know what it looks like because I looked at a picture of it, but I have never seen a mustard plant in my life. And I suspect that there are probably more bakers that might be listening and watching today than there was back in February, if I can believe the stories. A lot of people are taking up baking, me included. I've baked 3 times in the last week. I've gotten pretty darn good, if I may say so myself. Well, what is the difference that we experience? Because when Jesus was describing the kingdom of God to the listeners of his day, all these things would have been very, very common. There would have been many farmers listening to him. And it would have been very unlikely that no one had ever seen a very common bush, a mustard bush. Very typical thing that you would have seen then. And of course, if they ate bread, it was very likely they had baked it themselves or someone very close to them had baked it. But how many of us know what a weed is? Well, now we're getting closer to our own experiences. How many of you have ever bitten into a hot dog and tasted the mustard? Hopefully a Chicago hot. I'm from Chicago, which you'll find out a lot about me from my experiences in Chicago. So it better have mustard on it. And of course, all of us have eaten bread. So now we get to something very common to us all. We know what weeds are. We know what a hot dog with mustard on it is, and we've all had bread probably even today. Well, what Jesus was telling his disciples, and it's true for us, is that heaven was truly in their midst. And it's in ours. And it's not some unknown future date, but right then and right now. The kingdom of God exists now. We think of the kingdom of God as some, maybe most of us do, or many of us, some grand, very glorious, great thing. The first time I went to St. Peter's in Rome, and I entered the basilica, I'm like, whoa, this is like the most amazing thing I've seen. And I remember very distinctly thinking, this is what heaven must look like. Well, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's far more spectacular things in our world. Maybe sometimes we see, in nature. I suspect many of us would say, a mustard seed or a shrub doesn't really qualify when we think about the kingdom or bread or a field of wheat. And see, that's the whole point of these parables. It's meant, when Jesus is talking to us in parables, it's meant to reverse our thinking, to change our values. The kingdom of God, my brothers and sisters, can be in the checkout lounge at Schnucks or waiting in line at Ted Drew's. So I'm very glad to be back in St. Louis. It's not only for just for Ted Drew's. We are at the building of the kingdom wherever we recognize our call to discipleship and what that means. Caring about those who are sick. Thinking about that amendment that Troy mentioned at the beginning of Mass that's going to extend health care to people in this state. That is about building up the kingdom of God. Taking responsibility for this pandemic for ourselves, the things that we can do, wearing masks, being distant from people, physically distant, staying aware of the things that we personally can do to help end this pandemic, because all those things, my brothers and sisters, are calls to charity, the greatest call that Jesus makes of each one of us. In the parable of the wheat and the weeds, Jesus is telling us that the kingdom of heaven can flower on earth only if it grows mixed up with the weeds. That's the reality of our world. All these things that get tangled up with all sorts of things. He's talking about us. This is what our world looks like. It's not all of the chosen. We're going to be mixed up with the weeds. Jesus is telling us not also to judge things too quickly, because some of the weeds may actually turn out to be the wheat. It may be us that turn out to be the weeds. The mustard plant, that was a very common bush that became almost impossible to get rid of once it took root. And the kingdom of God is almost impossible to uproot once it settles in our hearts. Maybe our hearts and our lives will become even a little spicier and help us turn into maybe more interesting people as well. Maybe we will even attract a few birds. Maybe we'll attract others to the kingdom. Yeast didn't come in packets back then. People had smelly cultures growing in their kitchens, but Jesus reminded his hearers that God can take that smelly stuff and change it into something truly essential. The kingdom of heaven can be found in the midst of our lives. The next time we're tangled up in traffic or tangled up in the complexities of our lives, we can try to be patient with other people as God is patient with each of us. The next time we get a nice taste of a little mustard on a hot dog, we can give thanks to God for helping us to grow. The next time we bite into some good bread, we can appreciate God's ability to change us in ways that we may never have imagined. Jesus has revealed to us the signs of the kingdom in our daily lives. Are we ready to see them?